So we now begin issue 3 of Secret Invasion's main book as we move into the 3rd month. One thing I've realized by now is that, unfortunately, this reading list seems to be set up along those lines, rather than grouping stories together when the stuff that's happening is no longer being affected by others. For instance, what's going on with Hercules is probably not going to be affected by what the Human Torch is getting up to. So swapping between their stories instead of finishing the one and then moving on to the next seems to defeat the purpose of a reading order. This issue has a lot of the previous events reaching their conclusion. First, Maria Hill and her helicarrier getting a visit from Skrull Jarvis to ask for their surrender. Then the Captain Marvel Skrull that attacked the Thunderbolts having a powwow with Norman Osborn about why exactly he would do that. He doesn't seem to have anything to say on that, so we move on. The Initiative is champing at the bit to go in and kick some Skrull ass, while in New York, the Young Avengers are thinking maybe kicking Skrull ass is harder than it sounds. Hulkling, who is half Skrull, tries and fails to get the Skrull super soldiers to back down. So the Initiative jumps into the fray and all hell breaks loose. Meanwhile, in the Savage Land, Spider-Woman, whom you'll recall was replaced by their queen, takes out Echo so that there's no one to get in the way of her seducing Tony Stark, although the cover did kind of give that away. She uses that plus his confused state to convince him that he was, in fact, a Skrull the whole time. Just like the New Avengers had been saying, he did all of this to sow confusion in anticipation of this invasion. It would admittedly explain a great deal of his bad choices lately. Back in New York, it would seem that an alien invasion of supermen cannot be repelled with a ragtag army of conscripted heroes, so the Initiative quickly get their asses kicked and Vision gets his head blown apart. Luckily, that's when Mr. Prepared himself shows up, Nick Fury and his squad of commandos, for our cliffhanger. Sorry if it seemed like I was just breezing through that one, but there's mostly just a whole lot of people beating the crap out of each other in grand melees. This is fine, but at the same time, the book as a whole is showing the weakness of its approach. Secret Invasion should be the most central part of the Secret Invasion event, the part that most tells us the story. Tie-ins should be where the details are happening, where the individual stories come in, and more of the fighting. It seems like Secret Invasion's got it backwards in many cases, where the tie-ins have the plot and the main book depends on them to understand what's happening. The plotting and shadows are happening elsewhere, while huge open fights are happening in a book called Secret Invasion. This point is made all the more clear with our next book, Secret Invasion, Who Do You Trust? Issue 1 of 1. It contains 5 short stories. The first about the fact that Captain Marvel, the one of this time period, was actually a deep-cover Skrull agent and has some hesitance in carrying out its job. The true personality has been corrupted so that the cover identity of being the original Captain Marvel is more of his true personality. This is thus to explain, sort of, why he attacks the Thunderbolts, but even then it's not really much of an explanation. Frankly, this one, the lead story, feels the weakest. The next is of Agent Brand from S.W.O.R.D., who is still floating in space thanks to her little force bubble thingy and reflecting upon the past. A lot of it is about the Skrulls and the infuriating situation that it is to deal with them, and their borderline obsessive need to translate the meaning of the Skrull ambassador's random finger-tapping during meetings. It's only at the end that she finally realizes they were completely overthinking it. The Skrull was taunting them by simply tapping on a copy of Homer's Iliad. In other words, signaling that the Skrulls had their own Trojan horse and had already infiltrated Earth. The third tale is of Wonder Man and Beast, the Beast having been on the ship and looking like his older version rather than the current more animal-like one, jocular and speaking of how much he values his friendship with Wonder Man. The two have to work together to escape a cave-in, and by the end Wonder Man is willing to at least give him the benefit of the doubt. Only by then all of his arguments are suddenly making Beast question whether he can be trusted. The fourth story is of Marvel Boy. I admit I thought that he was actually the one who attacked the Thunderbolts with a costume change, so apologies if I misspoke. He's actually taken over the cube and is manipulating the guards and prisoners to work together. but is still an outside force being imposed upon them, so when a Skrull disrupts it, the prisoners and guards are quickly at each other's throats, leading to Marvel Boy killing the Skrull and trying to come up with a new plan. The final story is of the Resistance, a ragtag team on the West Coast who, among other things, behead a Skrull and use the still-living head in their battle, and defeating their conquerors thanks to subterfuge. Like Skrulls would, the head bitterly notes. This is what I think of for a tie-in, stories of either the finer details of the larger event or peripheral consequences to those events. Agent Brands is my favorite of the five, probably because it's the one that's most about them and the Skrull secret invasion, the long game of it, and how the devil is in the details. Beast and Wonder Man is second. It highlights the disparity between old Marvel style and the situation that has been created now. But it's a shame that this is a one-off, because there are more stories like this that can be told rather than wasting space in the main book or being bloated in other tie-ins. These are brief snapshots of what else is going on, and they work. I mean, the Captain Marvel one, though, that seemed a bit too big for the story. That's probably why it didn't really have an impact on me. There's so much around it that it had me confused that by the time I understood what the hell was going on, I didn't care. The phrase "too clever for its own good" really seemed to apply to the decisions around Captain Marvel here. But I really enjoyed the Agent Brand one. I would really like it if they had more of that kind of thing in this crossover. The thing about a secret invasion is the implications that this is a long game. Thinking and all of that. And even seeing the good guys get beaten in that area is fine. It's nice to see that at least a battle of wits is taking place here. And that's what's funny about this. The story is called Who Do You Trust? And a Skrull disguised as someone being a plot point is only in 2 of the 5 stories. It's like after reading this, the answer to Who Do You Trust is people who don't look like a fucking Skrull? So this brings us to issue 2 of Captain Britain and MI-13, which proves my point for me once again about this reading list. This picks up right from issue 1. None of the crossovers have had any impact on what's happened in between it all. We really should have just gone from 1 to 2. Now I'm trying to remember everything that was in issue 1 because as far as this issue is concerned, that shit just happened. Well, the issue begins by telling us that when Captain Britain died, the whole country just felt it. So that's a real 1-2 punch. You're huddled somewhere terrified because aliens are invading, and then you get a gut punch that tells you that the superhero named after your country has died. That'll keep that stiff upper lip stiff. Phaser is not dead from what had looked like being a fatal attack to me, although what she's somehow doing to Black Knight looks pretty fatal too. That is the grossest superpower since Captain Shart. But the real action is Pete's group who are trying to get into Avalon, supposedly the great collective unconsciousness of the British people and filled with magic. So the Skrulls have invaded and begun slaughtering all the magical denizens. So Oberon, a big purple guy, has closed all the doors to the other realms so that at least the Skrulls can't invade other realms from Avalon. And having done that, yelling at the people who showed up to help for not helping. Pete explains about the voice that they've been hearing, but it's not the benevolent cry of, like, the Lady of the Lake or something. It's some demonic being that only recently, and with much trouble, got locked away. Oberon tells them to forget about the voice, head to the cave where the sword in the stone is, and do the obvious. They call the sword Excalibur, so I'll go along with that. And they proceed to fail to pull out the stone, while the Skrulls are busy taking great British mythological icons and killing them in ghastly ways. And all I can think is, not what I expected from someone who writes Doctor Who. The Skrulls gather up all the magical items from here, then forge it into a chain and give it to a 4-armed wizard Skrull, but I'm sure you guessed that ending, didn't you? You know, I fear that it seems like I'm half-assing these, but I read through some of these and I feel like I have nothing I can really say about this. I guess I should apologize to Brian Michael Bendis. At least cocking up Age of Ultron gave me something to complain about. I suppose it's because there are so many stories going on in this event, it's hard to keep all of the little details straight. Especially in this kind of story that I just wasn't plugged into in the first place. A lot of what seems like common knowledge is making me wonder if I should head back to Wikipedia or something. The only thing that kept coming to mind is all your super duper powers. What would happen if you blew up the stone that the sword is in? Right? Don't say it won't work because of magic. If that was the case, we wouldn't see the Green Knight get his head punched off by a Skrull beastie. You blow up the rock, you pick up the sword, you declare yourself king, wait for the judges to make the call. That's what I say. Continuing on from last month also is Secret Invasion Fantastic Four #2. 2 titles, 2 numbers. It's been several pages revisiting the loves of Johnny Storm to get to the part where Elijah and Torch had something going on, which makes their fight have an extra layer of emotional complexity. Just imagine the man or woman who most broke your heart, and now imagine you're having a fist fight with them. That's going to be as complicated as Brian Michael Bendis asking you a math word problem. A train leaves New York. And it's going. And it's going. And it's going west. Yes. And there's a clock. Is it 3 or 12:15? Let's slowly zoom in on the clock a bit to see which is the long hand. And $3 later, you find out that there's a second train. And naturally, Luke Cage is driving it. Where the hell was I going with that? Okay, back to the issue. Elijah and Johnny finish their fighting by making out. She's snagged by a giant space jellyfish, and they have to work together to free her. Meanwhile, the Thing has fought off the bugs finally, and the kids have gotten in a giant armored vehicle their dad made for them because there's got to be some balance to the fact that Reed Richards is your father. They defeat a squid that is definitely an octopus. I don't know if that's supposed to even be a joke at this point. The kids are also smart enough to remember that the negative zone is where their dad put that prison for supers who weren't going to toe the line. So the cliffhanger says that the 5 of them are going to have to be seeing about having a jailbreak in the middle of the negative zone. Well, we're in the middle of a 3-act story, and mostly this is about Johnny and Elijah, but I have to admit, it's much more solid than the first part. I still see no reason why this wasn't in the main book for Fantastic Four. I've always felt that a miniseries for a character who has a main book should be to do something that wouldn't otherwise fit in their main book. Like, you don't just have a 4-issue Punisher series where it's just Punisher killing some criminals. Punisher's always killing criminals. What's so special about it this time that you felt the need to put it in a miniseries? Leaving that aside, though, the story is fine. The Torch material in particular carrying the issue with a blend of both heart and humor. I know this is damning with faint praise, but I am less apathetic towards the series than I was last issue. I mean, that's a quote they really should put on the Marvel website, shouldn't they? Next up is when we return to the Incredible Hercules. You recall that Hercules, joined by his sidekick Amadeus Cho, is leading a team of gods to go and sort out the Skrull deities. The author, quite pleased with himself, announces right up front that they are the God Squad. But from the beginning, the stakes are laid out as they show you a shrine to one of the 2 Skrull gods, filled with idols to those of conquered races, as a reminder of those that have been defeated. Amadeus is wondering about the morality of what they're about to do. The followers are the ones who are doing wrong things after all, not their gods. Is destroying their gods because of their idiot followers the right thing to do? Surprisingly, the gods on this ship say yes. But then, it is self-preservation for all of them if the Skrulls were to take over. They would only enslave the humans, but their pantheons would be wiped out. So they're going to have to enter this crazy maze-like thing in order to reach them. But since this place can lead to any pantheon in the universe, they're going to have to stop and ask for directions. And the one who has them is Nightmare. On the way, Hercules muses about how this reminds him of his young mortal adventuring days, how each of the passengers reminds him of someone, except Amadeus, whom he skips over. We eventually discover the reason for that because the price for the information is for Nightmare to learn the fears of the gods. And while looking through Hercules, discovers how Hercules destroyed an ore thanks to his arrogant pride while he was with the Argonauts. And while he was searching for lumber for a replacement, his young arms bearer was left alone to collect fresh water. where he was abducted and never seen again. Hercules wound up being left behind because he refused to give up the search for his young friend. This is more than just satisfying professional curiosity, though. Nightmare is going to use the power of their fear to take over the whole of the waking world. Now, luckily, this was anticipated, and Hercules has Amatsu Mikaboshi create a shadow copy of himself to go into the fear stuff, while the real one slipped off to get the information that they actually need. Now that Nightmare is unlikely to be cooperative after his plan is thwarted and Hercules punches him in the face. We finish up with a distraught Snowbird whose wounds about the fall of Alpha Flight have just been ripped open by Nightmare, and she turns to Hercules for some post-mission lovin', who, being Hercules, naturally is disinclined to say no. I must say, I did not expect to say this, but the Incredible Hercules is really turning into the bright spot of what was becoming rather mundane, and what is very likely going to have damn all to do with the main story. I mean, I could be wrong, but whether I am or not doesn't matter. This storyline is already really impressing me with how well it blends humor, character, and cleverness. In a book where the title character is someone I always had dismissed as a one-off muscle-headed oaf. This is such an effective tie-in because not only does this fit into the book it's supposed to go in instead of being a one-off, and make it much easier to follow despite knowing almost nothing about most of the characters, but it does the practical thing that a tie-in should. It makes me want to read the book even when there's not a tie-in. Captain Britain and MI-13, for instance, has not piqued my curiosity, and the connection to the Avengers in the two Avengers books is so tenuous that it has no bearing on whether or not I would stay or go afterwards. Indeed, I hate to have to say this, but so far, 2/5 of one issue and this one have been the only parts of this particular segment that have made me excited to see where things are going. And we've only got one issue left. And unfortunately, our final issue for this video is Secret Invasion, New Avengers / Runaways #1. Okay, we are already at least doing well before we get past the title even. This is a story that already qualifies as being fitting for a one-off miniseries. But that being said, I know bugger all about both teams here. I am very lost. The gist of it is that the Hulkling, as discussed, is half Skrull, and his attempt to intervene goes badly. Zaven of the Runaways is fully Skrull and griping until the invasion happens, when she then turns on her teammates and knocks them out. Apparently, though, this was to show that she's a real Skrull, so that she could escort them to safety. In the end, she and Hulkling escape together in the sewers, where they are then caught, leading to the cliffhanger. And I know, I'm sorry to blow through this one, but again, I don't know anything about these characters, other than that Victor is one day going to appear in a book called Ultron #1 that does not have Ultron in it. So I have little of any substance that I can say, and I wish that I didn't have to end on such a weak note here. But this is, at the very least, only the first half of the month that I'm going to be covering. I will soon be covering the issues in the second half of the month. So, hopefully things will be a lot more constructive when I get around to that. So, see you soon!